Welcome back, everyone, to our Groundskeeper chat series. I am your host, Meg Kruger. We are back live from Palm Springs 2025. This is day 2. So if you are picking up on any raspiness in the voice or fatigue, just understand that we're knee deep in the episodes at this point. But we've got some flavor, some flair, some wonderful guests joining us for our end of the show episodes here, and that is the Goatleys. The doctors are in. We are here. I was considering calling this a therapy hour, but I thought maybe I wouldn't bring all my grievances to the table, and I would, turn the focus back on you guys. So welcome. We also have Tyler Morris joining us back as a co-host on this episode. So Tyler, what I'll do is I'll have you introduce the Goatleys and kind of describe your connection, because I know you guys have got some history there.
Yeah, so I got to meet the Goatleys when I first got to Virginia Tech in 2017. I was fortunate to meet Dr. Goatley first, but then met the Mrs. Dr. Goatley after that, just through interactions with Dr. Goatley to my right. And it was really good having a full approach to coming to college, right? So having a really well-renowned professor, but also having somebody that brings a mental side to it, right? Like anytime I've ever talked to Lisa, it's always been thinking about the mental game, right? Yeah. Because at the end of the day, that's really important to what we do. We can do, the grass side of it, no problem, right? We can inspect dandelions on the campus, right?
No problem. That's a story we should probably delve into further.
But so we can investigate, weeds along campus. We can do all of that, but without the mental game playing a part of it as well. You don't get anywhere. So obviously really good to have met these two when I got to school at a really young age, and that relationship still grows. I still talk to at least Mike a little bit, and then Lisa sometime in the background, like giving her 2 cents as well. So it's obviously really good. It's really good to be here with them, and we can talk a little bit more about the dandelion. I'll let you approach it, just because it's a funny way to start the show.
Well, Tyler was a very good student, and he certainly had the dedication and passion, but he unfortunately got stuck with me in over a 2-year period when I had to pick up all the teaching due to some job changes in the department. And we have identification quizzes, and dandelion is typically a gimme.
Oh, no. Oh, no.
Yes, but one of our students that day failed miserably in his identification of dandelion, and myself and several other his academic colleagues in class make sure he never forgets that.
Oh, my goodness.
We're
putting his job in the line
2025
right now.
Talking about the dandelion story.
That's amazing.
I mean, it runs deep. I mean, when I graduated, I came back for graduation, and he had a dandelion waiting for me as my little graduation gift.
Yeah.
That's really sweet.
I thought that would be a nice thing to wear in his lapel.
I love it.
Corsage.
I love that. Well, Lisa, I wonder how much, last night when I was at the party, so many people, and I would love to talk to you about this too, Tyler, maybe even offline, because I'm sure it's a longer explanation. So many people just would come right up to him and be like, "You've got the worst job in the world." Like literally, I heard somebody say that to you, and they were like, the conversions, and there was just such a negative approach to it. And I'll give you credit. The way you handled all of those questions, you handled it with a positive, respectful approach. But I'm sure you being such an advocate for mental health, could listen to what he's up against, what he's already accomplished at MetLife, but what he's got in the next 2 years, and, want to have some kind of pulse on what he, his mental health. But does it give you solace knowing that he kind of has that foundation, or he already has it set as a priority?
Well, I think that's one of the things you just said, like, Tyler, as you responded to all of those questions, right? Like, you responded with a positive attitude. Right. Mike and I gave a presentation this week on, was it Tuesday? I think it was Tuesday. We did soft skills.
Okay.
Right? And one of the important soft skills is a positive attitude. Yeah. We talked about the power of the positive attitude. One of the things I say in the therapy room all the time to people is that there's 2 things. No matter how flat the coin, it has 2 sides.
Yeah.
Right? There's always another perspective. And the other thing is, sometimes the only thing we can change is our perspective. And sometimes that makes all the difference in the world.
Yep.
Right? So you can look at that as stressors, or you can look at those as challenges. Right? Like, you can look at those as problems that you might have difficulty overcoming, or you can look at them as challenges that I want to overcome.
Yeah.
Right? So I think having that positive attitude and being able to see it from that perspective is one of the important things it's an important soft skill that, we can bring to any situation, whether it's a work situation or in our personal life.
Definitely. And then you guys had an additional session called Better Mental Health. To give us the synopsis of that one as well.
So pretty much it was the official title was Better Mental Health, What Works, What Doesn't. And so we talk about the importance of mental health. There's a lot of statistics out there. NIH has a statistic that says that the mental health problems cost the global economy $2.5 trillion a year.
Goodness.
In terms of absenteeism from work, lost productivity, staff turnover, healthcare costs, those types of things. And that's not even factoring in the human cost, right? Like, what is the value of your life? What's the value of your happiness?
Right.
What's the value of your spouse's or your children's happiness and well-being, right? Like, that's a cost that we don't assign dollars to. So there are lots of reasons for us to pay attention to our mental health. And I go through kind of signs that there might be a problem. Sometimes we get into a space and we can get there slowly, and we don't realize that what a bad space we're in. We just kind of keep adjusting to it, keep adjusting to it, and we don't realize that we've gotten into such a bad space. We talk about the things that we try to use that we think are, we're all just doing the best that we can, right? And so the things that we drift into to try to manage what we're feeling, and it can be, very often it's substances, right? And substances can be caffeine and nicotine, right? And so we find ourselves in one of the things I tell people is if you find yourself in a space where it takes coffee and cigarettes to get going in the morning, and you're living on fast food and Red Bull throughout the day, and then it takes a couple of stiff drinks or more to settle down at night, we're not in a good space, right? But a lot of us find ourselves there because we're just trying to make it day to day, right? Like we just, keep trying to push through. And we may not recognize that we're not in such a good space. And so then we end on, hopefully on a more positive note, which is what are some of the things we can do to begin addressing our mental health, supporting ourselves, supporting good mental health. I tell people all the time that the brain is an organ like any other organ in the body. And so one of the first things we have to do is pay attention to our physical health and begin to make better choices for our bodies and therefore for our brain, but then also looking at things like work-life balance, social support. How do we reach out and connect with other people? Finding meaningful relationships and meaningful activities in our lives. Other things, we're more than work. Right. Like we are more than our work, and so then trying to find things that support us and things that that help us to be in a better space. One of the things that came out yesterday was someone saying that it's nice to just have a forum where we can talk about these things. Like we don't have to pretend that we're perfect. Right. And that we're not struggling. That it's validating to have an opportunity to talk about the challenges and the stressors and be there for one another.
Hey, one of the comments that I'd like you to chime in on further was, because it made me laugh, was shared suffering.
Right.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. That's what
like
one
trauma
guy,
bonding.
Yeah. That's the term we use for it in my field is trauma bonding, which sometimes cannot be such a good thing, right? And so that's what he said. This guy made a comment in the front row about it was nice to have an opportunity to talk and know that everyone is sharing in my suffering. That I'm not alone, and that's what I said. Kind of like my perspective on it is it's sometimes nice to know that we're not alone, that what we're feeling is normal and other people feel it, and that to have my feelings validated
100%,
right? Like that can be a really powerful experience, to have your experience validated by other people.
But also being weary of like not finding comfort in the fact that there are other people that are just as unhappy as you. Like you don't have to be like, oh cool, we're all suffering, so I'm comfortable here. Like I can remember my parents growing up were like, everyone hates their job, like you just do it. And it's like, oh, well,
really? You're like, really?
Yeah, like is that it?
With that.
Like, and so being able to take comfort in finding spaces to have those conversations because you have a shared experience, but working towards it so that you can kind of overcome, like, we don't have to stay here and live in that suffering. Right. And I cut you off, Tyler. I think you had a follow-up from that too.
And that's what Lisa and I's conversations a lot of the time were, especially from that young age, is like you get into the industry from a young point. You have the professors telling you, hey, focus on the work-life balance. Find something that, like, don't work. I can't tell you how many times he told me, hey, why are you working so much? I mean, 50, 60 hours sometimes a week, and I was still doing school. And he's like, you're going to burn yourself out, right? So that's when the conversation kind of evolved more, talking with Lisa especially, is like, they had all the turf students over for dinner one night when we were doing like the interviews for the new professor. And that was what the conversation like led to, was more of that, like how you strike up that work-life balance. And I still take some of the stuff that we talked about that night and even other nights onward, just to make a difference, not only in my life, but some of those students' lives or some of those other employees' lives that I've got to work with.
Definitely. And
other colleagues as well. It's also about vulnerability too, you know, and like you've talked about that a lot, is especially in that course that you did yesterday. It's about how you can be vulnerable and just talk about it. Everybody's kind of dealing with the same thing. Like you said, everybody's got that shared trauma to deal with. So how can you talk through it and be okay with it, right? And not only with colleagues, but with your personal connections as well, you know?
Wonderful.
Letting them have insight to it.
I think one of the important things is there is that we're all humans.
Right.
Yeah.
Right? Like, we're all humans, and there's a shared human experience. And when we close ourselves off because of fear of rejection, or fear of being judged, or fear of being perceived as weak, fear-based, that's all fear-based, right? That's what gets us into a bad space, because then we're pretending, or we're faking something, or we're wearing a mask, you know, and what we want to be able to do is to give ourselves permission to be our true and authentic selves. And that might include vulnerability, right? And we have to get out of that mindset where vulnerability means weakness, because it doesn't. It takes a lot of strength, actually, to allow yourself to be vulnerable and to be open.
Definitely. And, you know, I think in recent years, it's wonderful that we talk about it, you know, because I'm sure in your time, like, the conversation, the table wasn't even there to have the conversation. But I also think that there's the dangers of some organizations, or just that general, it becomes a buzzword, and it kind of loses its importance when it's just like, oh yeah, we practice mental health, like we give them a water break at the end of and so how do you, if there's somebody listening that's a crew leader, or, you know, a professor, or running a team of any sort, how do you make sure that the efforts you're putting towards work-life balance, or, you know, mental health, are actually making an impact? Like, what kind of checkpoints or like check-ins could they do to ensure that like it's having an impact with their crew?
I think one of the things we have to be careful about is not just saying that we address mental health, and, you know, have these things that we say, like a water break, or, you know, something like that, or we give them a T-shirt.
Yes.
Right. That's
I'm
not,
happy.
Yeah. Right. Like, that's not really discussing mental health. It's like, do you have policies around, you know, health screenings? Like, does your health insurance cover, you know, do you have an EAP? Does your health insurance cover mental health treatment? Do you look at your work schedule and see how many hours, you know, 50 and 60 hour work weeks? I get that there are times when you're prepping for an event that might be necessary, but that's not sustainable over the long term. Like, that's not how we can live our lives. Do we have flexibility? Do we have family-friendly policies? Do we allow people time to, say, attend a child's school play? Or, you know, how easy do we make it for them to take their child to a doctor visit? Or what are our policies around someone who has sick children that day? Those are the real things that we have to look at. That's where the rubber hits the road in terms of allowing people to be able to do what they need to do to address the, you know, their themselves as humans, and, you know, and as people.
Definitely.
What do you see from the academic side with that, though? Like, from years of teaching and being around students, like, how do you help them navigate through some of that?
Well, the academics go through the same thing as well when you're worried about promotion and tenure. And she talks about me when we do our work-life balance, and I would not be the example that we tell people now to follow. So there's a certain amount of maturity, figuring out what does matter. But for me, it was like in talking to you, and you figured it out pretty quickly, and you still are doing a lot. But it's really to start planning for it, to think about it. Realize, you know, we're telling you this because it matters. We're not wasting your time. But quite honestly, until you get to a point of where you've got the experience, you probably don't appreciate it.
Right.
It's what I see.
And as a mentor, Dr. Goatley, for so many, like, have there ever been conversations or tipping points with previous students where you had to help them have the courage to leave a place that wasn't working for them anymore?
I was most impressed. I won't use the name because he is a very highly qualified and well-known sports field manager. And he called me one day, and this has probably been 15, 20 years ago, to apologize to me that I've just disappointed you. And I was like, what'd you do? And he's like, I just resigned from my job. And I asked him what was going on, and it was the stress of the position. And I said, not only did you not disappoint me, I am so proud that you had the courage to make what was the right decision. And he basically regrouped, came into another position, again, extremely well qualified, doing phenomenal work. But that work-life balance became something that, again, I was proud that he knew enough to walk away from a very high-profile position and it wasn't anything that was going on that's unethical, that he should have left. He left on his own choice because he's like, I can't sustain.
It just wasn't a good fit for him.
Yeah.
Too much.
And it's so hard to find that courage, especially when it's like, oh, this is what I've been striving for.
This is my dream job, right?
Yes,
like, this is what I thought I wanted in life.
Yeah. We had Ryan DeMay and Stephen Lord on yesterday, and their session was called Dream Job Quitters. And like, they were like, when we put that title out, we were worried that it was going to, garner some negativity, but really we want people to see it as like aspirational, that you can stay in the industry, still be tapped into this network and this camaraderie, but really putting, your priorities first. But they said so much of that comes from, you have to be self-aware, because like you just said, especially in groundskeeping, you could occupy 20 hours a day by keeping your head in the sand with the task at hand. So how do you help, patients in your office, create that self-awareness? That is such a tough skill to
it's because that's one of the things we talked about in the soft skills was the definition of soft skills is all about self-awareness and self-management. A lot of people think when you learn these soft skills, you'll be better able to manage other people, control other people, manipulate, whatever, deal with other people. It's actually, the soft skills are all about you.
Yeah.
They're about your level of self-awareness and your management of your own emotions, your awareness of your emotions, what's going on for you, and how do I productively manage my own self in this situation. I think a lot of it is also education. Sometimes we don't know. Right. We don't know some things. For instance, there was one time that you had some of the students come over, Mike, and you had me do my Dealing with Difficult People seminar. And one of the young students there said, when we were talking about difficult people, and we talk about varying degrees of difficult people all the way down to toxic people.
Yeah.
And he suddenly stopped and he was like, I think I've been in an internship with a toxic person. And, so until he saw a definition of what are toxic relational dynamics, what is a toxic work environment, he wasn't aware. He just thought it was difficult and it was him. And, maybe it's this way and I just need to be tougher. Yeah. Right. And it's like, no, that's a toxic work environment.
Well, it's funny because you talk about self-awareness and for me, being completely open, that's something that I've talked about in my own personal therapy sessions, right? Is self-awareness, making sure that you can catch on things, not only professionally, but personally as well. And it's funny, it was so ironic because I was sitting there in the Tuesday talk during the time that I'm typically in my own personal session, right?
Yeah.
And I felt like I was in my own session. It was all of the same. It was all of the same things that her and I have been talking about that you two talked about as well. So it was just, it definitely goes, those soft skills build that foundation, and the self-awareness, that's where it starts.
Once again, it's about our humanity. It's about being better versions of ourselves, bringing, understanding what our strengths are, understanding what our weaknesses are. 100%. How do I capitalize on my strengths? How do I, learn and grow in the areas where I have weaknesses so that I can be a more enlightened human being in my interactions, in my own life and in my interactions with others.
Definitely. And we often talk about it in the point of view of oh, maybe you're involved in a toxic situation or you're being mistreated. But, what can someone do if they have an epiphany that they're the toxic person? They're the crew lead that they've been, seeping their negativity into others. Like that, think about the amount of courage that it takes to be like, oh man, I'm the problem.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah. It's hard. I guess I would say, it depends on how toxic you are, right? Like if you really are someone who has narcissistic personality disorder, you're going to have very little insight. That's one of the hallmarks of that particular diagnosis is you lack insight. I think the healthier we are, the better able we are to have insight about ourselves and self-awareness and owning our own behavior, right? Like there are times that, like for Mike and I, when we're in an interaction that doesn't feel productive to us, like either one of us will stop like I'll say, wait, can I get a do-over? Yeah. Like I didn't do that well. I didn't say that in the way that I wanted to, or, that didn't come out right. You know, can I start over? Or, I in the therapy room, I often say to people, there are 5 really, really powerful words that we can say to another human being. And those are, I owe you an apology.
Wow. Yeah.
And we hardly say that, right? We hardly come forward with someone and say, I owe you an apology.
It's why is that so hard?
I know.
Like, I think of, it's, something, a situation, a personal situation is I have 3 older brothers. And, when I met the first sister-in-law, I was like, oh, she's the problem. And then the second one, and I'm like, oh, wow, 2 bad eggs. And then when it was the third one, I was like, oh, shoot.
Wait a second.
I'm the problem.
What do they all have in common? It's me.
Yes. And I will tell my husband that all the time. Like when he complains about a coworker or something, I'll be like, well, that's the same problem you had with the last 7. Yeah. So have you ever taken the time to analyze maybe what your role is in that and how difficult that can be? But also, okay, so now you've realized that maybe you're playing a role in this fraction or friction. But why is it so hard to like own it in front of someone else? That's the where I struggle with, and I'll keep pushing it under the rug and hope that they didn't notice that I was being terrible to them and hope that I can make it up to them in some sense. But how much more efficient it is to do what you just said and just be like, I really owe you an apology.
I think what you talked about is the family aspect, right? So I always think of it because what we always talk about is family, right? And a lot of the times, like I always ask how the kids are, how everybody is. And I feel like that's something that's underestimated. So like, how do you guys take your experiences professionally, both, and help your kids be better people, but not like push them too hard, right?
It's interesting. One of the people who stopped yesterday after my Better Mental Health was asking a question about there's a conflict with her parents, right? And it's really interesting because like as she talked, I was thinking like, those are all the things she was talking about her parents. I was, in my mind going through like, do I do that? 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 And I arrived at, I don't. Yeah. Which is why we have a good relationship with our adult children and their partners, right? Like, because I think it's about having good boundaries, having good personal boundaries, recognizing what I can control, what I can't control, what I should control, and what I should not try to control. Yeah. Right. Allowing other people to choose their own behavior and then saying my job now, I have this conversation with parents in the therapy room all the time, even when their children are adults, like they're worried about their kids. I had a conversation the other day with someone whose child is away at college and she thinks he's having some mental health problems for this, repeat time. And I said to her, like, he kind of came forward with just a little bit. And I said to her, now your job. So she said, like, call me when you're ready. Yeah. And he said, I will. And I said, okay, now your job is to manage your own anxiety. Yep. Yeah. Your job is not to keep pinging him, texting him, reaching out. Like, your job now is to manage your own anxiety about this situation. Yeah. Right? Like, your job now is to manage you, not manage him, not try to manage your anxiety through controlling him. Yeah. But your job now is to manage your own anxiety. Like, we have to look inside and own our stuff and allow other people to make their own choices and choose what's right for them. And even if we disagree, particularly if we disagree, right? And it doesn't mean we don't lovingly give people feedback if we think they're on a wrong track, but there's a difference between trying to lovingly support someone and give them feedback and trying to control them and make them do what you think they should be doing. Right.
Yep, definitely. Well, I think that's like my number one fight or flight response is when I'm anxious is what can I control in this situation? And often it's, projecting expectations on people that I wouldn't even hold myself to that standard, and how unfair that is. And I think that's just such sound advice is, you can be there, but you have to also manage your role in it at the same time.
I want to chime in. I want to go back to I owe you an apology.
Yes.
Because
did you want to air some grievances?
No, this was.
I'm like, what's coming forward here?
I was like bringing back some dirty laundry or something.
I should have chimed in earlier, but that is a very valid statement. And what I find that I will sometimes struggle with, if she should happen to say something like that to me, is I would tend to say, "Oh, this isn't good enough yet. Let's drag this out."
Oh my gosh, I am the
longer.
queen of that.
And so you got to be a big person and accept that apology. And sometimes
oh my gosh,
that's as bad as the others.
It's just as difficult. Like, okay, well now that you've given me an inch, let me bring up the 10 other things that I think you should apologize for in this moment. Yes,
that's something I've had to reel back into, because I'll do that a lot. I'll be like, well, now that we're talking about this, let's go down the rabbit hole, and then it turns into not as good of a conversation as it could have been.
Yeah, we got to learn to let go, right? Like, that's the other thing. I think that's the other thing when I remind couples. Like, I do every now and again see a couple that has still a lot of goodwill between them. Mm-hmm. Like, most of the time, couples call me when it's way too late, right? Like, there's no positive will, no goodwill, no, very few positive experiences between them. But that's what we want to remind ourselves. Mm-hmm. That's what makes it easy. Yeah. Easier, I think, to let go is like I know that, he would push me out of the way and jump in front of a car if it were going to hit me, right? Like I know that, like, fundamentally, even at times when I'm really mad at him for something, I have to remind myself of that. Like, what are the fundamental truths of our relationship, right? And it is that he's got my best interest at heart. He loves me unconditionally, right? And not hold on to those little things. And that's what helps us let go in those moments when we really want to hang on to it and, like, because we're mad and we want to say a few more things.
I hear you.
Like, what are the fundamental truths in our relationship? Right.
So, and I want to ask you for, crew lead. I mean, I think about someone like in Tyler's position, the first time leading a crew, 24 years old?
Yeah.
And probably on your own journey. I mean, we're always on our own mental health journey, but what do we do when an employee or a coworker comes to us, and how do we navigate how serious it might be? Like, do we, immediately turn it over to somebody higher up, or is that maybe a breach of trust? Like, how can a crew lead really navigate a situation like that when somebody does come forward and say, I'm really struggling with my mental health?
I know for me, like, just leading that crew, and it was probably a little bit younger. I would say, 20, 21 maybe?
You were definitely on the young side.
So, but you have people, especially with me, like, you're at that same age as some of those kids, right?
Yeah.
And so you build a trust level because they understand that you're the same age, you're going through the same things, you're in the same classes. But I also had to be a boss to some of those kids at the same time. So that was a difficult conversation to have, because, like you said, you want to have the trust in both professional and personal sense. So I think for me, like, you sit and you listen. Like you said, like you've always said, you validate their feelings, and then you decide from there what the step is. Like, if it needs to go higher up, okay, let's take it that way. But you're going to have that conversation with that person. I'm not going to take that. I'm not going to take those things. I'm going to lead you down a path to whoever that next step is. Mm-hmm. But I won't talk about those things, because that's between you and whoever you want to talk to about it.
Yeah.
I'll take what you've talked to me about, listen, do whatever, but it stays right here, right? And that's the trust thing. So that was kind of how I navigated some of those, especially with some of the students that I still call friends, and I'm able to do that because those were some of the steps I took, at least.
And his ability to lead started early, because at a young age, as a college student, he was the first one I've ever had, probably as a freshman, that I would turn loose to serve as one of our communicators talking about field maintenance. Wow. He embraced that. He thrived in that. I mean, so that's kind of a natural gift that he had, was that did not faze him. Matter of fact, I felt like he thrived on that. And you could kind of see that from the start, is that Tyler embraces the opportunity to instruct and to talk and to tell people about what he does. And he was quite good at that. So I didn't know if that had always been something he had, but it struck me immediately, because usually you're trying to get someone to talk. he immediately stepped up to plate. So that's part of that. You can learn it.
Yeah.
But I think he was blessed. I think it was more natural with him. Just
there's a funny story with that. So my mom always told me I was obviously like this old, like 4 years old or so, and her mom got remarried when her dad passed away. So great, whatever. But I was walking around the whole time at that wedding and just like talking to people.
Nice.
She said you were 4 years old and running around doing that. So I think that like
work in the room.
It's weird because
Yes.
that's where it started. So it's always
Yeah.
funny when people say that, like, that you have no problem going out and talking. I always think of that story that she tells all the time, because that's really where it started, I feel like.
Look at that, the building blocks.
Well, I think one of the things, Tyler, when you were talking about, Meg, your question was, how do you do that, when an employee comes to you? I think the fact a relationship has already been built and trust has already been established if that person's going to come to you and confide in you in the first place, right? So there's been a whole lot that's happened prior to that that supports that being able to happen. I think the harder situation is if they don't come to you, but there's a problem, and then you have to address a problem, right? So I think that's another challenging situation, because I think if they come and confide in you or ask you for help, right? The trust is already there, right? Like whatever you've been doing prior to that has indicated to them that you're trustworthy and you're a resource for them. I think another thing to ask it, in that situation, is to just ask them, like, what do you need from me? What would be helpful? And see if they can identify some things as well.
Yep.
Right. And if someone's in such a bad space that they don't know, then it's like, how do I find resources? Right. Like, do we have an EAP? Would you be willing to access that? Do you want to talk with anybody from HR? Have you seen your doctor or whatever? Do you have a therapist? Right. Those types of things, trying to find resources.
Definitely. And is it good in those type of situations to offer up common ground? Like if you were to say, do you have therapy? Like, I see this person, or I do this. Like, is it good to give them like common ground to latch on, or do you want to remove yourself, from personalizing it too much?
It's an interesting question, because we face the same thing in the therapy room. Like, do we engage in self-disclosure? If we choose to engage in self-disclosure, what are the what are the circumstances that would support that? What are the circumstances where that would probably be something we would say, would be something we don't want to do? What types of information, how deep? I mean, we have lots of conversations in psychotherapy about self-disclosure and whether it's appropriate or not, and then how much, right? I think our litmus test for that is always, it has to be in the benefit of the client. It can't be to your benefit. You don't do it to talk about yourself, right? It has to be something that you think will benefit that other person. And so it has to be something like a shared experience or something that you think will be helpful to them. Like if there is a barrier to therapy, in knowing that you see a therapist might help them to say yes to that themselves, right? Or something like
this
that.
Is how our health insurance, provides it, or what have you.
I think it also goes back to trust, because you have to be able to discern, if I tell them this information, like right now it's my information and I have control over what happens with it, but once I give it to somebody else, I could ask them to keep that confidential, and they might or they might not. Right. Like, I have to be willing to engage in some type of discernment process about whether that's a safe person or will they weaponize that. Right. And obviously, I think if you have the sense, once again, it goes back to that self-awareness. If I have a sense that you're going to weaponize that, I'm probably not going to tell you. Right. Because I have sensed that you're not a safe person. I'm paying attention to whatever cues I'm picking up on myself, whether I'm fully aware of them or not, or I just kind of have this feeling that you're not a safe person.
Wonderful. Well, I know that Mike has to run, but I really appreciate the time that you guys were able to give us. I really feel the last time I was able to talk to you in any session I've been able to attend, like Tyler said, it's like, it's like free therapy, truly.
We do have to make sure we do the last session, the last part that we always ask.
What's behind the headphones?
What's behind the headphones?
Because, something Tyler and I have always bonded over is his ability to find interesting hobbies or things outside of the job that really help him maintain that work-life balance. So we love to talk music. So what is behind the headphones in that commute for you guys, or whether you're out on the research field and you're getting a moment to yourself? Is it podcasts? Is it an artist? What are you really listening to at the moment?
Or reading. We talked about books yesterday too, so we can go anywhere with it.
What's your outside of the job hobby?
Well, it's playing keyboard, and I don't read music, but I play by ear.
I love that.
And anything by a good pianist. So Billy Joel, Elton John,
Heck yeah.
and Bruce Hornsby are my go-tos, and I could listen to their music all day long, and do listen to their music all day long. So that would be the direction I would go.
And we could also take them down a wrestling rabbit hole, but that'd be a
Oh
whole
my
another 30
gosh,
minutes that
no
we could spend
joke.
just talking about
I was
wrestling.
trying to keep this professional.
No joke.
But yes, the Honky Tonk Man is the greatest intercontinental
my
champion of all time.
We got them going.
That's amazing. And Lisa, what about you?
So you want like a hobby, or do you want
Your hobby,
what's
or
my next
are you behind
thing?
your
TV
headphones?
shows,
I
movies,
will.
whatever
I
it
will
is.
say the next book I'm going to read is one by Mel Robbins. It's her new one called "Let Them,"
Okay.
and it is about like what our attempts to control. Like how do we disturb ourselves and cause ourselves a lot of emotional upset by trying to control other people.
Wow, very cool.
It's Let Them. That's going to be
And
my
I
next
wanted
book.
to ask you, have you ever read Good Morning Monster?
No.
Okay, it's like 5 heroic stories that came out of a therapist's career. And, she obviously had consent to share their stories at some point. But it was like the 5 most heroic stories that a therapist saw, like people that should never have been able to overcome what they did.
I agree. I see it every day.
Yeah.
I see it every day.
That book changed my life. I love it.
People are walking miracles.
Yeah.
The things I hear, the things that people have experienced and survived, will just amaze you. So, yeah, it's the
Definitely.
same thing.
Yeah, but neither of those is as good as watching professional wrestling. So I don't know.
Do you have a favorite wrestler? I don't think I've ever asked you this. In the time that you've had to watch with him, do you have a favorite?
I will say this. You know how Mike knew that I was the one? Do you know how? So I was in grad school at the University of Maryland. There's the Cap Center is up
Right.
there. And professional wrestling was coming to the Cap Center. He drove up. He was a doctoral student at Virginia Tech, and I was at the University of Maryland.
Big date night.
Yep. I went to that with him, and I actually saw the Honky Tonk Man in
She
person.
saw the
Oh
Honky
my
Tonk Man
gosh.
beat
And then-
Ricky Steamboat for
And
the
then,
Intercontinental
so
Championship.
I went to that with him, and then there was another date after that. So
Good.
That wasn't the last time.
What was the
So,
second one? Was
yeah,
it good?
yeah.
Was
I
the
don't
second
even-
one? You don't
I don't
remember
remember
the
what the
second?
other
The first
date was
one
after
was
that.
all
It was
right.
There we
watching
go.
post-match tapes. He does an analysis. He wanted to see if she picked up on the same things. That's amazing. You guys really are so enjoyable to talk to. And any time we have the opportunity to connect, I really appreciate it.
Thank you both.
Thank you all.
Thank you for joining us.